We don't want to see your face anymore. That's what my mom said before she hung up. Then she blocked my number. I stared at the screen for a full minute, pulse flat, emotion static. And then I replied just once through email, "You won't see my money either." That morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Not joyful, not even angry, just clear. But before I explain how I got here, let me rewind. I'm 31 now, but for almost a decade, I was my family's backup generator, quiet, dependable, only noticed when the power went out. When my dad's contracting business collapsed after the housing crash, our world fell with it. Debts, missed mortgage payments, unpaid credit cards. Someone had to step up. That someone was me. At 22, while my friends were backpacking around Southeast Asia and blowing rent money on brunch, I was sending grocery cash to my mom. Then came the mortgage, then tuition for my brother, Zach. Then my sister Kara's endless list of dance competitions and emergency hotel stays. Then my mom's little asks. 100 here, 350 there. Sometimes she didn't even ask. She'd just text, "Short this week. Fix it?" And I did, every time. No one ever asked if I could afford it. No one said thank you. What I got instead? My mom, "You should really come back to church. You're losing your way." My dad, "Marketing? That's not a real job." Zach, "You still live in that box apartment?" Kara, "You're so cold now. You never visit." 4-hour drives, they said. Like gas was free and my time didn't count. Never mind that I was paying for the house they wanted me to come home to. The breaking point? Last Friday. We were on a Zoom call, one of our family planning sessions. I'd just finished explaining that my rent had gone up again and that I'd need to scale back on some things. I said it gently, thoughtfully, like I was asking for permission to breathe, and that's when my mom leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye through the camera and said, "We don't want to see your face anymore." Click. Just like that, the call ended. I blinked, checked the screen on reconnected. Nothing. I texted. Message failed. Email? Ignored. Zach? Silence. Kara? Nada. My dad? Ghosted. They'd locked me out. As if I was the problem. As if I hadn't carried them like unpaid emotional baggage for years. But instead of crying, I got cold. Sharp. Focused. I wrote one last sentence. "You won't see my money either." And then I started pulling the plug. First, the mortgage. I wasn't on the deed. God forbid they give me ownership, but I was the one keeping that roof over their heads. A recurring transfer. Reliable. Quiet. Canceled it with 2 clicks. Then I called the bank to make sure. "Yes," I said. "Stop all payments. They're not my responsibility anymore." Second, that shared account with Mom. The one I created to give her some dignity, back when I thought I could help her stand on her own. Instead, it turned into a vending machine she controlled with guilt. I drained it, closed it. When the teller asked if I wanted to leave a reason, I typed breach of trust. Then came Zach's tuition, still linked to my email because of course it was. I logged in, removed the saved payment method, added a little note in his student portal, no longer financially responsible. Utilities? Gone. Their grocery delivery account? Deleted. Even called their landlord, "Hi, this is Ava. I won't be covering their rent anymore. You'll want to speak with the tenants directly." A long pause. Then understood. It felt easy, too easy. Like snapping invisible handcuffs and realizing they were never locked. The next morning, I had real coffee. The good stuff. Not instant powder mixed with tap water to keep the lights on at their house. I sat at my own kitchen table and, for once, didn't check 3 bank apps before breakfast. No alarms, no requests, no guilt. But silence doesn't last, not with people like them. That night, I got the first call. Blocked number, straight to voicemail. Then a text, "Zach's payment didn't go through. Mom's losing it. Call her. No hi, no how are you." Just panic dressed in entitlement. Then another number. This one, my Aunt Gwen. "Whatever's going on, your mom says you're being irrational. Can we talk?" Nope, I ignored them. Next morning, 3 missed calls. Then a voicemail from Kara. Her voice, soft, quieter than I'd heard in years. "I'm not mad, I swear. But my school emailed. If I don't pay the balance, they'll drop me. Please, just talk to Mom. She's not herself right now," she cried at the end. Not manipulative tears, real ones. And I'll admit something cracked. But I didn't call back because I cared for too long, because they never cared enough. Then came Mom. Texted from a friend's phone, please. This has gone too far. Let's talk like a family. A minute later, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice? Careful, calculated. But not angry, just off balance. You made your point, we get it. But this isn't how families work. We've always had each other. I don't know what you want from me. Do you want me to beg? Still no apology. Not one word about what she said. Not 1 inch of accountability. It wasn't grief in her voice. It was fear. Fear of what happens when the supply chain ends. And for once, I wasn't the supplier anymore. After that voicemail, I sat still for a long time, not thinking. Just sitting, staring at the ceiling like it might answer the question I hadn't asked yet. Was this really happening? Had I really done it? Because even after cutting the wires, it still felt like the house might call me back. Like their need would echo through the floorboards I'd helped pay for. But nothing came. And that silence, it was strange. Peaceful, but also unfamiliar, like walking into a room you used to live in and realizing the furniture's all been replaced. That day, I didn't open any messages. I didn't check the family group chat, not that I expected to find anything new. I knew how they worked, first the panic, then the guilt, then the rewrites. I just didn't expect the rewrites to come so quickly. Zach was the first. A wall of text, paragraphs long, each one dripping with resentment masked as memory. He said I'd always held money over everyone's heads, like the tuition I paid was some kind of power trip, not a sacrifice. He said he never asked for help, that I just inserted myself. I read the whole thing word for word, then closed it. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. But not in the way he probably hoped. It didn't sting like betrayal, it stung like realization. Like finding a leak that's been running for years and only just noticing the mold it left behind. Kara followed 2 days later with a text that said, I wish things didn't have to be like this. As if the whole situation was just an unfortunate accident, like a thunderstorm or a delayed flight. No mention of what Mom said. No recognition of how I'd been the one keeping everything afloat. Just vibes and vague regrets. Then came the voice memo. I shouldn't have played it, but curiosity is a tricky thing. It whispers louder than reason. My mom's voice came through low and slow, like she was carefully trying to sound calm. You think we used you, she said, but we didn't. We relied on you because we thought you wanted to help. You never said no. You always showed up. That line stuck with me. I always showed up, like it was my fault they got used to it. Like I'd trained them to depend on me, and now I was breaking a promise I never made. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't before. Showing up isn't the same as being seen. I'd shown up to their bills, their crises, their breakdowns, but they had never shown up for me. Not once. Not when I was scraping together rent. Not when I lost a client and spent a week eating instant noodles. Not when I got pneumonia and still made sure their power stayed on. And now, without the money, without the services, they didn't know who I was. Because in their eyes, I had never been a person. I'd been a resource. A silent investor in a family that had no dividends left to give. So I blocked them all, one by one. Not out of spite, but clarity. There was no reason to keep doors open for people who only walked through when they wanted something. I made every account private. I left the group chat with no farewell. I changed the passwords on shared apps and moved my savings into a new account under a new bank. It felt surreal, like cutting invisible strings that had been tangled around my ribs for years. And for the first time, I didn't feel selfish. I felt safe. But cutting them off didn't mean cutting off the memories. They came anyway, quiet, nostalgic, out of nowhere. Like the time I bought myself a new winter coat after 3 years and heard my dad's voice in my head, must be nice. Guess the rest of us just suffer. Or when I reached for imported coffee at the store and hesitated because for so long, even $5 extra meant sacrificing someone else's need. It was like every part of my life had been filtered through their expectations. And now, I had to learn how to live without that filter. It wasn't easy. Freedom sounds romantic, but in reality, it's a process of unlearning, of catching yourself mid-thought and asking, wait, is this actually my opinion, or just what I've been conditioned to think? In that space, I started doing little things I hadn't allowed myself to do, I walked around the park without my phone just to feel the wind. I bought a real journal and started writing again. Not spreadsheets or budgets, just thoughts, ideas, daydreams. I made a list called Someday and started turning it into Now. One of the first things on that list? Travel. Not the kind where you rush through airports and post for social media. Real travel, wandering, breathing. So I booked a solo trip, Portugal, Lisbon. A city with no family history, no obligations, no old ghosts, just food and music and color. I didn't tell anyone, I didn't ask for permission, I didn't even share it online. It was mine. The next thing on the list? Starting my own business. I'd been doing brand consulting on the side for years, helping artists and creators shape their stories. Always behind the scenes, always quietly. But now I wanted to do it on my terms. A creative studio, a small, messy, beautiful space where ideas could live and grow. I reached out to a local business coach, had a meeting, brought my notebooks. She looked at me halfway through and said, "Why haven't you done this sooner?" And I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did. I just didn't want to admit it that for years, I didn't believe I was allowed to choose myself. But now I was. That week, I sent out emails to old clients, got responses, booked meetings. One client even said, "I was hoping you'd finally branch out. Funny how people can see your potential better than you can." I started saving, budgeting not for them, but for me. I made a plan, set goals, bought a planner and filled it with ideas. Every page was a step away from who I used to be. And yet, there were moments when doubt crept in. Nights when the silence felt less like peace and more like being lost in a forest. But I didn't call them. I didn't go back, because this wasn't a phase. It was a decision. A decision to stop trading my life for scraps of approval. A decision to stop being the lifeline for people who would have let me drown if it meant they could float. Toward the end of the month, the messages stopped. Even the burner numbers, even the guilt-soaked voicemails. It was like they finally understood maybe not why, but that I wasn't bluffing. I was gone. And in that silence, I found space. Room to imagine things. Like hosting my own workshop. Like waking up without an alarm. Like painting my apartment the weird ocean blue I'd always loved but never picked. Because someone once told me it was too much. Turns out, I'm too much. And I like it that way. It's strange how silence can become a soundtrack when you finally stop filling it with other people's chaos. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to messages, missed calls, or digital fires that needed putting out. The silence wasn't lonely. It was clean. I started to notice how loud the birds were outside my window and how good it felt to stretch before coffee instead of checking my bank balance. The quiet gave me something I hadn't realized I'd been craving: permission to exist without being useful to anyone else. I'd spent years making myself small so others could feel secure, putting their comfort above my sanity. But now that I had the room, I could finally stretch out into the space that was mine. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not just my habits or my budget, but the way I carried myself. I started walking slower, choosing my words more carefully, holding eye contact longer. Not out of defiance, but because I no longer felt the need to explain my presence. I wasn't apologizing for being there anymore. A few weeks after I cut them off, I got a message that didn't come from a burner number or distant cousin. It was my dad, an actual email, short and stiff, like he'd forced himself to keep it civil. "Whatever issues you have with your mother, I'm sure we can talk through them. You've made your point. Don't let pride cost you your family." That word pride, it stuck with me like a thorn in my throat. Because it wasn't pride that had kept me away. It was pain, and finally seeing the difference was half the battle. They always called it pride when I said no, when I set boundaries, when I stopped handing over pieces of myself like coupons they could redeem whenever they felt like it. But it wasn't pride. It was peace. It was the refusal to bleed quietly just to keep the family image neat. I didn't respond to his email. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I had already said them with every payment I canceled, every call I ignored, every moment I chose myself instead of their chaos. And to be honest, I didn't trust myself to open that door even a crack because I knew how they operated. They didn't apologize. They negotiated. They reframed. They edited the past until you couldn't tell who hurt who. And once you responded, even with kindness, they'd take that as permission to start rewriting your boundaries again. I wasn't giving them the pen this time, so I moved forward. The studio space I'd been eyeing for months suddenly opened up. Small but bright, with old wooden floors and tall windows that let in too much light to hide in the corners. I signed the lease without hesitation. No second guessing. No mental gymnastics about who might think I was being reckless. Just a simple decision for once, one that belonged to me. I painted the walls myself, choosing colors that made me feel alive instead of respectable. Forest green on one side, soft cream on the others. I brought in a thrifted couch, a big table for projects, and a mismatched set of chairs that looked nothing alike but somehow worked perfectly together. It was messy, it was imperfect, it was mine. People started coming in. Artists, small business owners, dreamers with notebooks full of scribbles and nowhere to begin. And I helped them. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. And that difference mattered. One client cried after their brand launch, said they'd never felt seen like this before. I smiled, not because I was proud of the work, but because I recognized the feeling. I'd spent so long being invisible to people who claimed to love me that I'd forgotten how powerful it was to be seen for who you are, not just what you give. Every time someone thanked me, I tucked that feeling away, a kind of emotional savings account, building interest in self-worth. And as the days passed, I found myself becoming more than just someone who escaped a toxic family. I was becoming someone new. Or maybe someone old, someone I used to be before life taught me to prioritize survival over self. But the past has a habit of circling back when it thinks you've let your guard down. It happened on a Sunday. I was leaving the studio, keys in hand, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Old habits. It was Kara. Her voice was thin, quieter than I'd ever heard it, like she'd been underwater and only just come up for air. "They want to have dinner," she said. "Just dinner. No strings. I told them I'd ask you first." I stood still on the sidewalk, staring at the concrete like it might give me the right words. "They miss you," she added after a pause. I didn't respond right away. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. But my stomach twisted in that familiar way it always had when the family wanted something dressed up as nothing. "Did they apologize?" I asked. She sighed. "They said they want to move on." And that was my answer. Moving on without acknowledgement isn't healing. It's erasure. It's pretending the fire never happened while the walls are still charred. "I'm not coming," I said, not cruelly, just firmly. Her voice cracked. "Why not?" And I think in that moment she realized I wasn't bluffing, that I'd meant it, that this wasn't punishment, it was closure. After that call, the quiet returned, but this time it didn't feel like absence. It felt like air. I started spending more time at the studio, hosted my first group workshop, taught people how to find their voice, how to shape their story, how to tell the truth and make it beautiful. 5 people showed up. One of them stayed after, helped me clean up, and said, "This space feels like home." I wanted to cry, not out of sadness, but because someone saw what I built and didn't ask for more. They just appreciated it. I walked home that night under string lights wrapped around the trees, thinking about how strange it is to feel at home in your own life after so many years of living on someone else's terms. And just when I thought the final thread had been cut, something surprising happened. I met someone gentle, someone curious. We got coffee. We talked about books and bad TV and how weird adulthood is when you're still learning how to be human. And for the first time, I let someone in without feeling like I was sneaking them past security. I told her the truth about the family, the fallout, the freedom. She didn't flinch. She just listened, asked questions, laughed at the absurd parts. And when I said I wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious, she said, "Then let's just be honest. Every step of the way." And that sounded like something I could finally believe in. I still have moments, nights where I wonder if I went too far, if maybe I should have just waited until things got better. But then I remember things only got better when I left. That wasn't a coincidence. That was the result of finally taking my hands off the broken machine and realizing it was never my job to fix it. They called it pride. I called it survival. Now I call it peace. By the time the seasons began to shift, I had slipped into a rhythm that didn't revolve around survival. It was the kind of slow, sturdy rhythm you feel in your chest when you're finally building something meant to last. The studio felt lived in now, not just rented. There were coffee rings on the desk I refused to clean because they marked conversations worth remembering. There were half-filled sketchbooks on the shelves, ideas blooming on sticky notes, playlists echoing from a small Bluetooth speaker in the corner. It wasn't just a space anymore, it was a pulse. And for the first time, I felt like I was beating in time with it. People came and went, clients became collaborators, and collaborators became friends. No one demanded, no one drained. We all poured into each other in a way that felt generous, not extractive. I'd built a community without even realizing I was doing it. Maybe that's what happens when you stop trying to be useful and start being real. That girl I met at the cafe, her name was Nora. She was different from anyone I'd ever let in before, open but not invasive, curious but never probing. She didn't treat me like a puzzle to solve or a project to fix. She just wanted to know who I was, not what I could do for her. And I'll admit, it scared me at first. When someone is kind without condition, it makes you realize how many conditions you've been surviving under. But she never rushed me, never guilted me for my hesitation. We went slow, slower than most people our age would tolerate. Walks around the lake, sharing fries at the food truck park, sitting in silence on opposite sides of the room while we both worked. And that kind of slow felt safe. It gave me space to feel things I hadn't let myself feel in years, like joy that wasn't followed by a crash, or affection that didn't have strings wrapped around it. Nora didn't ask for explanations when I pulled away sometimes. She just waited for me to come back, and I always did. In that piece, I started to reflect more, not in the self-blame kind of way I used to, but in a way that helped me make sense of the pieces. I looked back at who I used to be and didn't feel shame. I felt compassion, that version of me who bent over backwards, who skipped meals to make sure the power stayed on in someone else's home, who smiled through tears during family birthdays she couldn't afford to attend. That girl wasn't weak. She was loyal. She was desperate to believe that love could fix what history had broken, and maybe that's why I stayed so long. Because I kept hoping that one day they'd look at me and see a daughter instead of a dollar sign. But now I didn't need that. I saw myself. And it was enough. I wish I could say they stayed away for good. But that's not how stories like this end. One afternoon, I got tagged in a photo on social media. It was Kara. A family dinner. Everyone smiling. Matching sweaters, of course. The caption said, "Family always finds its way back together." No names, no specifics, but it was intentional. A breadcrumb. An invitation disguised as sentiment. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I didn't respond, but I felt it. That old ache pressing against my chest like a bruise you forgot about until someone poked it. I told Nora about it later. I expected her to shrug it off, say something comforting. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and asked, "What would it take for you to go back?" And I didn't have an answer. Not because I was torn, but because I realized I'd never actually asked myself that question. I'd always assumed reconciliation required surrender. That to step back into the fold meant laying down everything I'd fought to claim. But what if it didn't? What if going back didn't mean bending? What if it meant walking in on my own terms? The question haunted me in the quietest way. It didn't hurt exactly. It just sat with me. I started journaling again. Not about what they did, but about what I wanted. And somewhere between the half-finished thoughts and ink smudges, a strange kind of clarity emerged. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them. The idea of a family that could apologize. That could change. That could accept me as more than a wallet in human form. But ideas don't put in the work. People do. And they hadn't. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Aunt Gwen. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since she asked me to be more understanding when Mom forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. The subject line read, "Hope you're doing well." The message was brief. Polite. Too polite. "Your mom's been struggling," it said. "The house is on the verge of foreclosure. Kara's had to drop a semester. They won't say it, but they miss you. We all do. Just thought you should know." It ended with, "No pressure, just love," which was ironic because pressure disguised as love was their specialty. I read it twice, 3 times. Then I deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't fix it without breaking myself again. I knew how that story ended. I show up, I save the day. They pretend nothing happened. And I get left with the bill and the blame. Nora and I were painting the studio's back wall when I told her about the email. She didn't offer advice. She just passed me the brush and said, "You already made your choice. This is just them testing the door to see if it's still unlocked." And she was right. They weren't reaching out because they saw me differently. They were reaching out because they were desperate. I wasn't the daughter. I was the escape plan. And I wasn't playing that role anymore. The more time passed, the more I realized that healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt powerful. Other days I felt like a ghost in my own story, trying to remember how to be real. But those days didn't define me anymore. The real proof of healing wasn't the absence of pain, it was the presence of choice. And I kept choosing me, every single time. I started running small classes at the studio, taught people how to build their own brands, tell their stories, reclaim their voices. We laughed, we cried, we made playlists and bad coffee and magic. One woman brought in her teenage daughter, said she wanted her to see what real self-worth looked like. And that floored me, because for years I didn't think I had any to give, but it was there. It had always been there, just buried under all the noise. Now that the noise was gone, I could hear myself again, and I liked the sound. I hosted an art night one Friday. People came. Some brought food, others brought ideas. I watched them fill the space with laughter, with music, with stories that mattered, and I stood in the corner for a moment, just watching. Not because I felt out of place, but because I felt so deeply placed. Like I wasn't orbiting anymore, I was rooted. That night, as we cleaned up and turned off the lights, Nora wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "You've built something sacred." And I believed her, because I didn't build it for approval or applause. I built it for truth, for safety, for peace, and every part of it was mine. By the time the trees started turning gold, I barely noticed how many days had passed since the last time I thought about them. I wasn't counting anymore. I wasn't measuring silence like a punishment. It had become the new normal. I had more people in my life than ever, and none of them were bleeding me dry. I had inside jokes that didn't start with awkward family stories, conversations that didn't need censoring, and a routine that felt like mine instead of a script I'd been cast in. There was a moment late September, I think, when I caught myself humming while rearranging furniture at the studio, and I realized something wild. I was happy, not in the loud fireworks way, not in the way that needs proving, just in that quiet, stable way that sits in your bones. The kind that doesn't shake when someone else raises their voice. Nora had started staying over more often. She didn't move in officially, and neither of us brought it up, but her favorite mug lived in my cabinet, her playlist took over my mornings, and her sweater hung on the back of my kitchen chair like it belonged there. We weren't rushing toward anything. We didn't need to. Every conversation with her felt like planting something, a little deeper each time. She asked questions that no one had ever thought to ask, not about my family, but about me. What color I saw when I closed my eyes. What I'd name a star if I discovered one. What I thought happens to unfinished dreams. And she listened like the answers mattered, even when I didn't have them yet. It was during one of those long, quiet evenings, just us, a half-eaten pizza, and a documentary we weren't really watching that the message came. Not a phone call, not an email, a letter, handwritten, in cursive. The envelope was plain. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. My mother. The last time I'd seen anything in her handwriting, it was a note asking me to cover a car repair because you're the only one who actually has their life together. That note had ended with a smiley face. This one didn't. It was 2 pages long, neat, deliberate, no tear stains, no apology either. Just a slow, winding monologue about how hard things had been, how family gets messy, how no one's perfect. She wrote about how Kara was struggling, how Zach hadn't been able to find steady work, how the house felt empty, and somewhere in the middle, she slipped in a sentence like a needle in a warm blanket. "You made your point, but maybe it's time we all move forward." That was it. Not "I'm sorry," not "we were wrong." Just a suggestion that I let it go, like this was a grudge instead of a graveyard I'd finally stopped digging. I folded the letter back up and sat there for a while. Nora didn't ask what it said. She waited, patient as always. And when I finally handed her the pages, she read them without commentary. When she looked up, she just said, "Do you want to talk about it?" I didn't. Not because I was afraid of the feelings, but because I already knew how I felt. Disappointed, but not surprised. That's the thing about clarity, it doesn't protect you from hurt, but it does make it familiar, predictable even. I didn't need to rage or cry or scream into a pillow. I just needed to not answer. And I didn't. The letter went into the drawer with old receipts and expired coupons. It didn't deserve fire. It didn't even deserve a second read. A week later, I hosted a creative showcase at the studio. Something small. Just friends, clients, people from the community, music, lights, laughter that filled the walls like insulation. Nora had organized the playlist. I made too much chili. Someone brought a keyboard and started playing improvised songs about paint colors. It was messy. It was perfect. And somewhere in the middle of it all, as I stood in the doorway watching people I loved exist freely in a space I built with my own two hands, it hit me that this life wasn't a rebound from pain. It was the reward for surviving it, not just surviving, choosing to leave it behind without needing it to collapse first. But peace doesn't mean immunity. A few days later, I ran into Zach. Of all places, it was the grocery store. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. I was reaching for almond milk. He was coming out of the frozen food aisle. We both froze. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who'd been hollowed out and didn't know where the pieces went. He said my name like a question. I just nodded. He asked if I had time. I didn't. But I said yes anyway. We sat on a bench outside. Neutral ground. He didn't lead with excuses. He didn't lead with much at all. Just a deep breath and a quiet, "I didn't know how much you did." "Not until you stopped. I didn't say anything. Let the silence answer for me." He continued, slowly, like each word weighed more than he was used to carrying. I was angry. I said a lot of things I shouldn't have. "Mom," he hesitated. "Mom still doesn't get it. But I think I do now. I think I was part of the problem. For a moment, I wanted to believe this was it. The moment where the story finally bent back into reconciliation. But then he added, "I just wish you'd said something before walking away." And there it was. The hook. The subtle shift of blame. The expectation that I should have made my pain louder for it to count. I looked at him, really looked, and realized something. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't cruel. He was just comfortable. Comfortable in a world where I was always the fixer, the background player, the one who absorbed without complaint. And now that I'd stopped, the air felt thin to him. I stood up and said, "I hope you figure things out, but I'm not coming back." His face didn't change much. Just a flicker of something regret, maybe, or just surprise that I really meant it. I walked away without looking back, not out of defiance, out of certainty. Because walking away isn't brave if you keep checking to see if they're following. That night, I went home, curled up with Nora on the couch, and didn't mention the encounter. I didn't need to. She could feel it in my silence, the way I exhaled just a little deeper. She kissed the top of my head and whispered, "You did the right thing." And for the first time, I believed it without needing reassurance. I believed it because I felt it. Later, I pulled out that old journal, the one I found during those first days of silence. I flipped to the page where I once scribbled, "Someday, I'll be enough for myself." I underlined it with a red pen, then wrote underneath, "Today I am." And I meant every word. Winter came early that year, the kind that tricked you with sun and slapped you with wind. I remember watching the first frost paint silver edges on the studio windows and thinking how something so cold could still be beautiful. It reminded me of this whole journey, how something that started with loss and silence turned into space and light. The studio felt fuller now, not just with people or projects, but with meaning. Every brush mark on the wall, every scuff on the floor was proof that I didn't just walk away, I walked towards something. I didn't go back, I grew past it. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone to see that for it to be real. The calls had stopped. The letters too. Even the passive social media digs faded. I think they finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. I hadn't pulled back to punish them. I had simply stepped out of a role I never auditioned for. And when the script fell apart without me, they couldn't decide whether to blame the plot or the actor. Either way, I was gone. There were no grand gestures, no final confrontation, no last apology to tie things up neatly. Just distance and peace. The kind of peace that doesn't ask you to forget, only to stop bleeding for people who refuse to clean up the mess. Nora and I started traveling more, little weekend getaways at first, then longer trips that didn't require explanation or strategy. We walked along coastal towns where no one knew our names. We drank cheap wine on balconies and laughed until our cheeks hurt. It was simple, and it was everything. One night, under a navy sky scattered with stars, she turned to me and said, "Do you feel free yet?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I did. I just wanted to hold the moment before I said it out loud. "I think I felt free for a while," I finally said. "I just stopped needing to prove it." She smiled and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. That was the thing about her. She never tried to rescue me. She just stood next to me while I rebuilt myself. Back home, the studio grew. Word spread. More people came. A local magazine did a feature. The headline said, "From Burnout to Beacon, How One Woman Turned Silence into Art." I almost didn't read it, but Nora did. She framed it. Said I should remember what it took to get here. I kept it on the wall behind my desk. Not to gloat, to ground me, to remind me that I earned this not through perfection, but through persistence, through walking away when every part of me was trained to stay. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A young woman showed up at the studio. She looked nervous, held a sketch pad like it was armor. Said her name was Leah. She'd heard about the workshops through a friend. Said she didn't have a clear vision, but she had stories. Wounds. Words she didn't know how to shape yet. I invited her in. She sat quietly at first, watching the others, hands tight in her lap. But by the third week, she was laughing. By the sixth, she was creating something that made people cry. And when she hugged me after her first showcase, she whispered, "You made me feel like I matter." I almost lost it right there. Because those were the words I had once begged to hear from the people who claimed to love me. But hearing them now, from someone I didn't owe a thing, made me realize how far I'd come. I wasn't giving to be seen, I was giving because I had enough to share. That night, I walked home through the cold, thinking about the version of me who used to ration joy the way she rationed rent. Who thought healing would look like an apology or a reconciliation dinner or someone finally saying, "We were wrong." But healing didn't look like that. It looked like moving on without waiting for that moment. It looked like waking up and not dreading the sound of your phone. It looked like sipping coffee and knowing every cent of it came from your own work, your own hands, your own choice. It looked like sitting beside someone who never made you feel like you were too much or not enough. Just exactly right. Sometimes people ask if I'd ever talk to my family again. I never give a firm yes or no. Not because I'm unsure, but because healing isn't a destination. It's a boundary you build so you don't lose yourself again. If one day they knock and I open the door, it won't be out of guilt or longing. It'll be because they did the work. Because they came not just to reconnect, but to repair. But I'm not holding my breath. I'm not holding a seat open at a table where I was only ever allowed to serve. They'll have to build their own. A few months later, I hosted a bigger event at the studio. A full day of talks, workshops, art displays. People came from other cities. Someone called it a movement. I called it a miracle. Not because it was flashy, but because it was built from nothing but truth. At the end of the day, as the last guest trickled out and the sun started casting golden light through the windows, I stood in the middle of that room and closed my eyes. I thought about the girl who used to cry in silence because she didn't want to be called dramatic. Who used to think love was something you earned by giving everything away. And I whispered, "You made it." Not to celebrate, to acknowledge, to say, finally, without doubt or hesitation, that I was proud. Of every decision, of every no, of every quiet morning I spent choosing myself over the roles they tried to box me into. Spring returned like a secret. Buds on trees, color sneaking back into the corners of everything. I walked past my old grocery store one day, saw the spot where I'd run into Zach. I didn't flinch, I didn't look twice, I just kept walking, because I didn't need a full circle moment. I didn't need proof that I'd healed. My life was proof. My peace was proof. Nora's laughter echoing through our apartment was proof. The stories on the studio walls were proof. And sometimes, that's all you get. Not applause. Not apologies. Just proof that you chose yourself and the world didn't end. It opened. So no, I didn't go back. I didn't unpack the past for the 100th time to try and find a version of it that didn't hurt. I didn't rewrite history to make them look better or myself smaller. I just lived, loudly, softly, clearly. And in that living, I found something I never thought I'd have. Not family exactly, but something better. A life that didn't need fixing. A heart that didn't need convincing. A love that didn't ask me to shrink. And a future I didn't have to buy by selling pieces of myself. I was never the broken one, just the one who finally stopped breaking for everyone else. And in that choice, I became whole. Story 2, my money were gone when I returned from a holiday and my sister had moved into a new apartment. We assumed you'd be happy, Dad remarked. Thus, when I returned to the United States the next morning, I arrived accompanied by a lawyer. After spending too much time underwater, it seemed like the first breath. I had spent 11 months working abroad, 6 days a week, 2 jobs, insufficient sleep, attempting to construct a future with each transfer I made home, money by dollar. I considered the meaning of that money, independence, safety, and the gradual creation of a life I could at last call my own. I couldn't stop imagining what I would do with it. Perhaps a small home in a peaceful area. Perhaps finally sign up for that mechanical design course I've been putting off for years. I had everything planned out. There was a reason behind every sacrifice. I should thus have been at ease as I entered my former flat through the front door, still reeking of wood polish and dust. Rather, I had a nagging feeling that something was wrong. What I saw made my mouth drop even before I opened my laptop and looked at my bank account. $3.72 is the balance. I blinked and then refreshed. The figure remained unchanged, in the tens of thousands. Lost. My thoughts first did what any other would do. Fraud, huh? I had traveled abroad. Perhaps someone hacked the program or swiped my card. I began phoning, shaking. So hard I dropped the phone twice. The support rep was friendly but puzzled. No unauthorized access. No red flags. It didn't make sense. I continued digging. Transaction history, transfers, internal withdrawals. And then I saw it. Every dime had gone to one familiar location. A joint savings account I hadn't accessed in years. An account I'd registered with my parents when I was 19 when I'd forgotten was still theoretically operational. No, they hadn't. Sitting there, I gazed at the TV. I was surrounded by an overwhelming quiet. My heart had stopped thumping. Something felt empty and chilly in my chest. Reaching for the phone, I phoned home. Mom replied with a smile. "You're back too? How did the journey go?" As if we were discussing the weather, she said. I didn't cooperate. I didn't even greet them. Where is my money? There was a long silence. "We were going to tell you, honey," she said with a sigh. I realized then she was already aware of what I was discussing. She said, "We were going to tell you," as if that improved it. A heads up, for example, would have lessened the betrayal. I remained silent. I had nothing to say, not quite yet. So she continued, "For weeks your father and I discussed it. We considered. You weren't actually spending the money at the time, and your sister was in dire need of assistance. It was there. My sister? Naturally." Behind my eyelids, I could already feel the headache growing, the steady throb of incredulity giving way to rage. However, I spoke evenly. "For what purpose did you utilize it?" I inquired. One more pause. "She relocated to a new flat, something nearer the city. It's in a nicer area, but it's not inexpensive. And she's gone through a lot recently. She has endured a lot over her life." Silently, I said, "Is that your go-to justification for her?" "It's unfair," Mom said immediately. "She is beginning anew. She's using my money to rebuild. You weren't present. You were abroad. You did not specify the duration of your absence, and we discovered the reason. Now I'm cutting in." My voice had an edge. Even she understood that perilous silence because she paused once more. "Your dad," she said. "He came up with the concept." "Really?" "He believed that the fact that we could all support one another would make you, well, happy. Family supporting family." I ended the call. The phone was not slammed down by me. I didn't shout. I didn't speak again. I ended the conversation after letting the quiet speak for itself. After that, I took on the road. At first, I had no idea where I was heading. Perhaps a part of me hoped that this was all a miscommunication, that when I would get at my parents' house, they would inform me that it was just temporary, that although the funds had been moved, they had never been touched, said they were already correcting the error that had occurred. However, I was greeted by my dad's smile as soon as I entered the house. Calm, informal, almost arrogant. I was certain there was no error. He got to his feet, arms wide, as though I had just come back from a trip. Son, hello. Welcome back. You look nice. Thinner. It could have been the strange meal since I didn't grin back. He gave me a shoulder clap, utterly disregarding my face. Listen, he replied. Just listen to us before you get upset. We believed you would be content. It's going wonderfully for your sister. Really flourishing. She needed a lift. What's money for, really? It isn't beneficial to those you care about. I gazed at him. You didn't get that money from me. His grin wavered. He said, You left access open. We believed you were mistaken. I lost my temper. You stole it. Now he frowned. Avoid being theatrical. You'll recover everything. You handle money well. You were and always were. But she needed it now. You weren't present at all. Just as I opened my mouth to reply, I heard heels clicking on the hardwood floor. There she was, Rachel, my sister. Her hair was styled as though she was going to brunch. I'm holding an iced coffee. Not at all concerned. She gave me a quick look before grinning. As if nothing had occurred, she responded, Hey, world traveler. By the way, you are welcome. My new apartment is great. You ought to stop by someday. She gave a wink. That was the end of it. That was the time. I didn't shout or toss anything. I didn't respond at all. I turned, left, and took my car home. I also hired a lawyer that evening. As the lawyer scrolled through the documents on his screen, I recall sitting in his office and looking at the edge of his desk. Daniel Klein was his name. Sharp outfit, sharper eyes, quiet man. He was introduced to me by a buddy who had experienced a similar situation, said that he didn't just win. He examined the opposing side. I told him everything. Because I never considered removing them, he was able to see the account logs, withdrawals, and shared access my parents still had from every transaction and access point. Unbeknownst to the individual, that trust from infancy lingered like a loose wire until it ignited and set everything on fire. Daniel nodded and leaned back when I was done. This is stealing. Calm as always, he said. You have explicit proof that you are the only source of funding for the account. Those monies were not legally theirs. In addition, they are my parents. She's my sister, I asked. He didn't flinch. Not important. They didn't have your consent. This was not a present. They took money out of your account without your permission and used it like a piggy bank. I believe I gave a nod. I believe I gave him thanks. To be honest, I can't recall what I do recall. Crystal is carrying a document into my car as she makes her way back. Allegation of fraud, an overview of financial abuse, draft court orders. And this emotion that I couldn't quite identify, it wasn't wrath anymore. It had burned off the night before. It was chilly here. In me, something had broken, but not in the loud, spectacular sense that breaking moments are typically thought of. It was quieter here, sterile. There was a hollow crack, and everything seemed weightless. I refrained from crying, didn't yell. After I got home, I made copies of the paperwork, ironed my shirt, and set my alarm for 6 in the morning. The next morning, I knocked on my parents' door at 7:15. With a coffee mug in his hand, my father, dressed in a robe, opened it. He gave me a perplexed glance. What? I gave the manila envelope to him. He glanced at it below, then up at me. What is this? Notice from the law? I said. You'll want to read the last few pages attentively. Among them are the requests for asset recovery. I'm making accusations. His countenance moved the type of slow-motion transformation that you only see in individuals who are recognizing for the first time you're not playing their game anymore. We're being sued by you, he replied, as if the term hurt him on a molecular level. Indeed. Are you going to court with your family? No, I'm holding thieves accountable, I responded. My mother emerged in the hallway after him, still partially clothed and holding on to her sweater. What's happening? Next to leave the kitchen was my sister, smug as ever. still feeling drowsy. The folder in his hands caused her face to freeze. "Are you serious?" she remarked, her voice higher. "Are you really following through on this now?" I didn't respond. I stayed out of it. I simply gazed at them. I said, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer to 3 people I thought I knew." I turned and left after that. I didn't stand in that house ever again. Less than an hour later, the first call came in. I choose to disregard it. I listened to the second one ring all the way through. I completely shut off my phone by the third. I knew what they would say, so I didn't want to hear the justifications, the guilt trips, or even worse, the pleading. I had grown up hearing that. It was merely a mistake. We are related. You overreact all the time. However, I noticed my father's hands shaking when I gave him those documents that morning. It wasn't an exaggeration. That was when they realized they had pushed someone too far for the first time. Daniel was a quick mover. The documentation was filed in 2 days. An official complaint for fraud and financial abuse. By the end of the week, a hearing was arranged, and we added a motion to freeze assets. Civil court rather than criminal court, for the time being. But where it counted, it would damage them. Their reputation, their credit, and their bank account? Daniel, the kicker, found out that my sister's new apartment, the one with the fancy appliances and the views of the rooftop, had been co-signed using fake paperwork. I was on her list of guarantors. She didn't even inquire. When Daniel showed me the lease, he grinned. According to him, identity theft is obvious from that alone. My RSP solution was easy included. My parents were clearly frightened by the time the court date arrived. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of them. My mom in an oversized cardigan, trying to look more like my dad in a wrinkled suit. His eyes started as if he thought someone would rouse him from a nightmare. Rachel failed to appear. Her attorney did. Excellent. I was not interested in seeing her face. They got settled right away. Partial restitution was mandated by the court, along with damages around 70% of what they had taken. It didn't seem like a win, but my lawyer insisted it was. After court, there were only signatures and silence, no explanations or apologies. My dad attempted to trail me into the parking lot. "Wait," he murmured, and caught up with me. "This was not necessary for you to accomplish." I gently turned and gave him one final glance. I responded, "You're correct. I chose to." And I continued walking. Not everything happened at once. Like in the movies, I didn't just pack my bags and go missing overnight. That was slower, quieter. The little things were where it all began. A PO, a new phone plan, box in a different state. I deleted my accounts, redirected all of my correspondence, and opened new ones with a credit union. This time, I was the only one with access to accounts for 3 cities. 2 weeks following the court date, the settlement's compensation appeared in my account. It was wired over for the most part. If they didn't default, the remaining amount would gradually be paid back as part of the repayment plan. However, the money no longer mattered to me. I was concerned about going. Everything that wasn't important was sold by me. Donated half my clothing, got rid of the vehicle I had driven as a child, purchased a used hatchback from an uninquisitive man. I didn't tell anyone, not even my few remaining pals. I stood in my empty apartment the night before I went, the window open and the lights off. The air was still the type of stillness you only notice when you're ready to say goodbye to something or someone. It wasn't because I wasn't depressed that I didn't weep, because there was no more to mourn. The next morning, I left my key on the counter and went out. Not a word, no farewell, simply gone. I traveled till the road stopped seeming familiar. After that, I continued to drive in the Southwest. After arriving in a town I didn't recognize, I leased a tiny 1-bedroom apartment above a bookshop for a week. I was unknown. Nobody questioned my presence. I introduced myself as Caleb. It wasn't, but it would do. 3 years have passed since then. After holding my breath for years, the first few weeks seemed like a breath out. Nobody made a call. My door was not knocked on. I didn't wake up fearing that I would receive another message filled with remorse. The stillness wasn't empty. It was brimming with relief. I acquired a job without anyone noticing. Work with cash. Nothing ostentatious. Assist with repairing the basement bookstore's rear area. Eventually began to handle inventories. The job was done quietly, steady. Who I used to be didn't matter to anyone. I purchased a low-cost flip phone. Just numbers, No GPS or applications. I decided to include 2 of them, complete. I would occasionally become inquisitive. I would look up their names on the laptop I had hidden beneath the floorboards. My folks, they were still where I left them, Rachel. Repayment dates are still a source of contention. I'm still stuck. However, they were never able to locate me, and they wouldn't. Losing the money wasn't the most difficult aspect. It wasn't the betrayal either. Not in the way you might expect that intense agony, similar to being stabbed in the rear. Pain like that subsides. No, quieter was what lingered. It's similar to discovering that you no longer recognize the walls of a place you once called home. Sometimes I would suddenly be struck by a recollection. On the sidewalk in front of our former home, my dad was teaching me how to ride a bike. He ran beside me, his hand solid on my back. On Sunday mornings, while humming to herself, my mother makes banana bread. When we were youngsters, Rachel and I used to play in the backyard. We were trying to catch fireflies when she grabbed my hand and started laughing. Now it didn't feel genuine. Those recollections had lost their glow, as if the recording had been altered by someone. Noise overtook it. And when I tried to recreate them, all I could hear was, "We believed you would be content." That phrase bothered me more than anything else. The arrogance wasn't the only thing. It was what was expected of it. Like I should be thankful that they took something away from me for someone else. As though my future, my sacrifices, and my hard work were not mine. They were to distribute it. I began to write everything down, not to publish, not for the sake of closure, only to clear my mind of it. I wrote about the moments leading up to the split on page after page. I found that the account was empty that night. The triumphant expression on my sister's face. My father's expression when he recognized that I wasn't bluffing. I didn't write it as a victim, though. I wrote it as if it were a record or inventory, a silent testament to the guy I aspired to be, because something had begun to develop in the quiet, in the space I'd created between us. Nor resentment, nor revenge. Another stuff. Command. The tale was in my hands for the first time in my life. They say when you disappear, you lose things. Links. Identity. Acquaintance. In a sense, that is accurate. However, nobody discusses what you gain. First, freedom, the type that peacefully rests in your chest. Steady, but not victorious or loud. Trustworthy. The type that comes from recognizing that people never saw you in this new life in the first place, rather than from blocking them out. I didn't need to give an explanation. Caleb was all I was. When the coffee maker broke, the bookshop employee mended it, remembered the names of the regulars. Nobody inquired about my origins. No one questioned why I didn't talk about my family. People made courteous assumptions to fill in the holes, and I gave them permission. I began working as a volunteer at a community center nearby, mending children's bikes and teaching a few of them how to use a wrench and look for a slack chain. Activities I formerly engaged in with my father. It felt different this time, as if I were altering the meaning of those recollections. I created a savings account under my new name. No access to the joint. There are no paper traces to trace back. At first, I obsessively checked it, fearful it might disappear once more. However, it didn't. It remained silent, unaltered. On certain evenings, I would stroll to the outskirts of town and simply relax. Take in the distant blinking of the city's lights. Consider the ease with which individuals such as my sister and father continued after the destruction of another person. How they always assumed that everything would be rebuilt around them. Not this time, though. I hadn't communicated with them since the court date. No texts, no calls, no accidental sightings. They could have thought I had fled the country. In a sense, I hadn't. Geographically, spiritually, I was someone else. Right now, I once came into a woman on the street who had a striking resemblance to my sister. The same voice, the same stride, the same hair, and for a brief moment, my chest froze. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't her, only a stranger. And I had no feelings, no terror, no hatred, only distance. I was unaware that I had been seeking this particular type of tranquility, nor justice, nor retribution, nothing but quiet. It occurred on a chilly evening, early in December. It's the sort of night when the wind reminds you as it moves beneath your coat. Skin and bone still make up your body, regardless of the thickness of your walls. The phone rang as I was flipping the sign to close the bookstore. Not my own phone. The landline of the store. After dusk, it hardly ever rang. After hesitating, I took it up. "Hi there?" First, silence. A voice that I hadn't heard in more than a year then. "Dad is here." I remained silent. I had to give it a go. "I'm not sure whether this is still your phone number." No, it wasn't. Not at all. I didn't own the store. He'd gone seeking hard because the number wasn't published. "How did you discover this?" My voice remained flat as I asked. "A contact. Did someone remember you from somewhere?" He cleared his throat. "Caleb. Correct. That's your new name." I didn't say yes or no. Simply let the stillness to continue. To argue, I didn't call. He spoke hastily. "I am aware of our error. I am aware that what we did was unacceptable. I wanted to let you know that your mother hasn't been feeling well. Not with all that transpired." He waited for me to inquire about her well-being. I didn't. The house had to be sold. His voice grew quieter as he went on. For a time, Rachel returned to live there. Nor did things turn out the way she had hoped. Her property was foreclosed. Living on someone else's dime only works when that person is still making payments, it turns out. I almost laughed. Not because it was humorous, but because it was so predictable. Similar to gravity, similar like rain, as the sun rises over those who have never learnt. He continued to express his remorse about it, regarding the pleasant moments we shared. Even when I was 12, he attempted to bring up the fishing excursion, said that we were once close. I was stolen from by him. He gave my future to someone else as he watched me collapse. He felt she deserved it more, not because he had no other option. He wanted now. What? Salvation. Finalization. I gave him time to finish. I eventually spoke when there was a pause. "What hurts the most, you know?" I said. "The money isn't the problem. Even the betrayal isn't it. You advised me to be glad about it while standing there and looking me in the eye." He didn't answer. "I won't ever get back to you," I added. "I don't need you, not because I despise you. And you could never tolerate that." I hung up after that. Did I cry? No. Was I lighter? Not at all. Something different was what I sensed. Similar like shutting a door to home. You had already departed. As if you were shutting off the light in a room you would never enter again. His voice was gone from my ears after that. I occasionally ponder whether they still mention me. If my name comes up at the dinner table in low tones like I'm a ghost, a warning story, the missing son. I don't think about it though, because in reality, I didn't vanish. I got away. I created something they will never be able to touch. A life without flinching at the sound of the phone. A life of mine is not safeguarded. Actual. Story 3, my sister yelled. "You no longer belong in this family," over supper. And everyone laughed. "Great, then your wedding is on you," I remarked with a smile before walking away. What caused the chuckle the next morning? The scream? No, not even the actual words. It was the way she said it, and everyone laughed. When someone crosses a boundary and no one has the courage to call it out, you hear that cheap, uncomfortable laugh. You no longer belong in this family. As if it were the most casual thing ever. My sister Jenna spewed it out over a bowl of Caesar salad. Before the main course, she drank 3 glasses of white wine, which caused her voice, loud eyes, and crazy cheeks to turn crimson. Halfway through a bite, she stated that, and I was still holding my fork. And for a moment, I assumed she was kidding. However, there was a startled silence in the room before my uncle began to chuckle. From my cousin. My mother even smiled nervously and glanced down at her plate. I knew I was done at that point. I put down my fork, used the linen napkin to dab at my lips as if I had it all the time, and gave Jenna a direct look. "Fantastic," I said, grinning in that quiet, collected manner that always made her nervous. "Then it's your wedding." After that, I got up and left. No one tried to stop me. Not my mother, not even the fiancé of Jenna. I never went to a family meal before, but let me a moment to back up. I was never the favorite, and you must realize that. Jenna owned that space, so she was able to cry when she wanted to. The baby was her, the miracle, the young princess who received everything on a silver platter after 2 miscarriages. And me? I was the trustworthy one, the person who took over when our father died, who covered the expenses, who sacrificed my life to save the survival of others. I said yes once more, as I usually do, when Jenna got engaged and confided in me about how tight money was, despite the fact that her Instagram was filled with pictures of spa getaways and champagne breakfasts. I paid for the venue, the music, the florals, even the deposit on that crazy 3-layer cake, she insisted, had to be specially crafted with edible pearls, and still I didn't belong. That meal was the one that broke everything, but it wasn't the first fracture in the glass. And I made the call the next morning. I began removing the pins from the grenade one by one. Was in Jenna's lap, but she was unaware of it. The morning following the meal, I awoke peacefully. There was that unsettling silence that precedes a storm, when you no longer have a tight chest. Because at last you've come to terms with the fact that you're going to burn the entire damn thing down. I brewed coffee. I opened my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam build. Let's start with the location. I had made the deposit in advance, and the remaining amount was set to be automatically paid the following week. I initiated the email exchange with Sheila, the event planner, who had patiently endured Jenna's incessant, egocentric emails. "Hello, Sheila," I typed. "Regretfully, I must cancel our reservation for the June 3rd wedding in Montgomery. Due to a change in circumstances, I will be stopping all further payments. I am aware that there is no reimbursement for the deposit. Imagine that one domino fell because of a kind gift." After that, Jenna, the caterer, insisted on a farm-to-table meal that went well above budget. In any case, I had consented, in part because I didn't want her to label me cheap at another family get-together. It didn't help. For $1,000, I scrolled to the invoice. Still unfinished. "It's due in 2 days. Cancel." The band, a downtown 3-piece jazz ensemble, then arrived. "Who?" added a touch of class, Jenna said. "They were good men. In fact, I felt guilty for canceling on them. Since the event was no longer taking place, I was honest with them. They comprehended. Musicians understand what it's like to be cheated on at wealthy children's weddings. I saved the best, though, for last. Jenna, the florist, had selected a designer who specialized in installations that made a statement. Imagine rose-covered tables and 9-foot flower arches. Since everyone would be too preoccupied with acting as though they liked one another, nobody would be appreciative. Just the day prior, I received a text from the florist regarding ribbon colors. I responded to her text. "The wedding has begun. I appreciate your time." By 10 a.m., every thread Jenna had used to string together her fantasy day had been quietly snipped. And she hasn't said anything yet, nor a phone call, nor a text. My mother didn't even use a passive-aggressive emoji. I think they assumed I was bluffing. They had no idea who I was. This was more than simply money, therefore I wasn't finished. Everything they believed they could get away with was at issue, and now it was time Jenna's fiancé found out who he was truly marrying. By midday, I was seated in front of my PC, gazing at the folder named Jenna Receipts, which I never imagined using. I had begun it out of resentment. She yelled at me over breakfast a few months back about how I owed her for being such a challenging child. I still remember that brief moment. I thus started to save voice memos, screenshots, and brief conversational excerpts, things she didn't even consider saying. However, I did recall. It seemed trivial at the moment. It seemed necessary now. I started by displaying a screen grab of a text conversation between Jenna and Madeline, her best friend. 3 months ago, around the time she became engaged, they went on a date. Jen: "Kevin is pleasant, but lovely, wonderful. No mystery, no edge." Madeline: "But you're getting married to him." Jen: "Girl, I'm exhausted. It's a joke to date broke men in their 30s. Kevin is steady but uninteresting. I'll cope." The first act was that. The ones concerning our family followed. The ones that caused my stomach to turn more than the money ever could. After our mother encouraged her to be more patient with me, she had a talk with another bridesmaid. Jen: "I swear I'll yell bridal maid if my mother defends him again." "He's funding your wedding, isn't he?" Jenna: "Yes, as he doesn't have any other advantages. His melancholy little legacy." The icing on the cake came next. The statement from the credit card. She possessed a hidden card, but Kevin was unaware of it. Yes, I did. When she left her Chase login open on my laptop one afternoon and requested me to help her with her budget, I discovered it. 12 grand in debt, largely on designer shoes, expensive skincare, and one unusual charge for a hotel in the city that wasn't related to any bridal event. I put everything in a tidy boot, made a little package, and wrote the letter. Kevin, hello. Even though we don't communicate often, I felt it was important to let you know before things get out of hand. I've included several remarks and screenshots. It's not a fabrication. You should carefully read them, particularly the ones in which Jenna mentions us and you. I hope you reconsider who you want to spend the rest of your life with, but I don't expect gratitude. I sent it. Staring at the television, I reclined in my chair. I didn't feel guilty. I was not anxious. I simply felt as though something had been taken out of my chest, following years of strain. The actual fireworks began that night. The first call came in as I was preparing dinner. Jen, I let it to ring. Then my mom arrived. Then Jenna once more. Next up is my aunt, which firmly established that whatever storm was brewing had begun to approach land. I didn't respond to any of them, but Kevin, he didn't give a call. It was deafeningly quiet. A man who recently discovered that his fiancée had been lying to him with the casual accuracy of someone wiping lint off their shoulder was precisely what I imagined. It was close to 9 o'clock when I eventually got Jenna's texts open. There were 23 of them. The first few were the standard showmanship. Are you crazy? What's wrong with you? Everything was damaged by you. Her tone then changed, though. Don't do this, please. Can we have a conversation? It wasn't my intention. I was intoxicated. Everyone was giggling. Kevin is not answering. Please, you're not understanding. Oh, I got it exactly. A screenshot was included in the subsequent message. Her frenzied wall of texts and Kevin's reply. I looked at the screenshots. I'm not simply canceling the wedding. I'm done. Don't call me. It was severe, even brutal. He wasn't mistaken, though. At that point, Jenna began phoning instead of texting. From the other side of the room, I saw the screen come to life. 20 minutes and 10 calls. I poured myself a drink and shut off my phone. My mother sent me a fresh string of SMS when I woke up the next morning. They were worried at first. What happened? What are you doing? Then guilt. Jenna is still your sister, even if I am aware of her tendency for drama, you promised. And, of course, the blame. Your behavior is dishonorable and spiteful. She feels ashamed. Is it something you truly want on your conscience? I didn't answer. Rather, the first proceeded with my day, canceling one final payment. I had arranged for a rooftop bar downtown to host a brunch after the wedding. Jenna would never see another $1,800 be lunchtime. Kevin sent me a note. Thank you. That was it. 2 words, yet they hit harder than anything else that week. It remained quiet for a few days following that. No texts, no calls, not from Jenna, not from my mom. Even one of the aunts, who often served as the family's public relations department, did not send a guilt-ridden email. I wasn't gullible. I was aware that they were discussing plans and most likely pointing the finger at me for everything. When the person who maintains the equipment abruptly leaves, that is what occurs. They scurry. They get into a panic. When the edges of their well-maintained illusion begin to corrode, they search for someone to blame. And they had no scapegoat for the first time in years. I met my cousin Rachel at a petrol station on Friday. She looked at me, a mixture of amazement and pity, as if Mom couldn't decide whether I was the antagonist or the anti-hero in the family's latest dramatic tale. Is it true then? As if we were in a soap opera, she asked while lowering her sunglasses. I simply arched an eyebrow. You will need to be more detailed. She paused. The wedding of Jenna was ruined by you. She leaned in, and Kevin left her. You informed him of the texts and the debt? I didn't say yes or no, I said. If I did, do you think I was wrong? Instead, she paused, blinked, and then whispered, No, I only needed to hear that. Kevin contacted me once more the following evening. He called this time, I replied. I simply wanted to express my gratitude. He repeated it, but it had more weight this time. I felt as though I was witnessing a different side of her. Not even I recognized. Although I initially believed she was under stress, I now believe she just believed she could get away with it because she always has. Silently, I said, He remained quiet for a while. "You saved me from a lifetime of that," he remarked. We didn't talk long. Though it seemed like closing the door on something, there wasn't much else to say, just locking it permanently without slamming it. In the meantime, Jenna's Instagram, which used to be flooded with selfies every day and countdowns to her and Kevin's wedding, had completely stopped posting. 3 days for. Then there was a post. An image of a wilting bouquet in black and white, caption, "People are not always who they seem to be. I learned my lesson." It was almost whiplash from the irony. After a week, there were 2. June 3rd, the wedding date, passed without a champagne toast or a single white dress. No promises, no garter throw, no sob-filled lectures about how love overcomes all obstacles. Rather, there were murmurs, extended Facebook updates from distant family members skirting the truth about what had actually transpired. Old family friends who were known for talking too loudly during reunions made some audacious remarks, inquiring as to why Jenna's registry had disappeared and why the location had been changed to another couple's wedding. The quiet, however, was hardly the most shocking thing. It was the speed with which others surrounding her dispersed. It turns out that the entourage is canceled along with the celebration. Her bridesmaids unfollowed her. Melissa was one of them. Days later, I believe you even DM'd me with the remark, "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do. Well done, ouch." My mother made one final attempt to reintegrate me into the family. She unexpectedly came up at my flat. With a tray of lemon squares in our hands, we continued to act as though nostalgia and sugar could make everything better. "You made your point," she remarked before I even got the door fully open. However, enough is enough. I crossed my arms and stood at the doorway. "Just enough of what?" I inquired. She pursed her lips. "Jen isn't eating. She refuses to leave her room. She is inconsolable. She is coping with the fallout from her behavior." Flatly, I replied. "That's what we call adulthood. She was embarrassed by you. She made a fool of herself." As if saying it more softly would make it sound more reasonable, my mother's voice trailed off. "She's your sister. I was her brother, too," I said, right up until she screamed that I didn't belong in this family in front of everyone. You also chuckled. She opened her mouth in an attempt to explain and apologize. I will never know. Before she could make up her mind, I closed the door. I didn't require an explanation. No more. I wasn't furious. I was not even resentful. I had freedom, liberated from the never-ending guilt trip. The love that is performed. The fact that I only ever joined the family when they were in need. Labor and money. A favor that had emotional coercion as a side effect. Not anymore. I prepared a good meal for myself that evening. Saw a film that I had been eager to see. For the first time in what seemed like years, I slept well. Jenna, too. Without a platform to stand on, she would need to figure out how to be the focus of attention. It occurred in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday, right as I was wrapping up some work from home. My stomach turned the moment my phone buzzed with a notification. A group conversation that had been quiet since the wedding was started by the Montgomery family. Suddenly, spectacular implosion was underway once more. Some part of me had stayed even though I'd thought about leaving 100 times. Like seeing a slow-motion train accident. Additionally, the disaster seems to have accelerated today. One had been sent along by Jenna. I simply want everyone to know how much I've been going through recently. It was the goal of those individuals who should care about me to ruin the best period of my life. Someone has deceived me, told a lie, left behind. But I'm getting better. And I hope the same folks experience the pain of exclusion when I'm prosperous and successful one day. Never should family turn against family, even if they're bitter, despite the fact that they have always been envious. I wasn't specifically mentioned by her. She was not required to. For about a minute, the conversation was quiet. Uncle Mark then added his voice. "Jen, hurry up. You informed your brother that this family did not include him. You treated him like a spare tire even though he paid for everything. Now don't twist it." The cousin from the gas station, Rachel, then joined in. To be honest, I thought he was too silent, but now I believe he was simply fed up with being exploited. I can't hold him responsible. One by one, people either responded negatively or sent out neutral messages like "we all make mistakes" or "let's not do this here." But no one protected her. Not even Mom or Aunt Cheryl. who had previously raved about Jenna's dazzling enthusiasm for an entire Thanksgiving. After 5 minutes, Jenna departed the conversation. I said nothing at all. Not in private, not in the group. I didn't have to. The family, who had watched me carry them like a mule for years, saw it for the first time in my life. The years of unbalance, the dynamic, and the entitlement that had always been written off as Jenna's personality. After she went, the room was silent, as if the smoke had finally been expelled. And me. At last I got something. To keep others warm, you don't have to burn yourself alive. A month or so went by. Jenna didn't contact out to express regret, provide an explanation, or snap, which, to be honest, felt more out of character than anything. My mother did once a quick voicemail that sounded more like a sigh than a message. Only her voice, exhausted and sweet. I'm sorry things went this awful. It hadn't gotten this terrible, though. This was how they had always been. People only recently become aware. Meanwhile, those who were still aware of it began to spread the message. Kevin was no longer in the state, began anew, received a promotion to a friend of his, sent me a LinkedIn message. A simple good call, man, and fist bump emoji. Conversely, Jenna returned to live with her mother. It was almost poetry in its irony. After being pampered, paraded, and bailed out for a lifetime, she ended up just where I had begun, in the same guest room that had been mine, and under the same roof. However, I no longer had any backup plans, emergency funds or deposits coming from me, all of which were cloaked in brotherly guilt. She never received a reimbursement from the wedding vendors. Most didn't call her back. The contracts didn't even include her name. I ensured that. She attempted to reschedule the wedding and have someone else pay for it. It was rumored. A real estate investor with more ego than money and a new boyfriend. However, nothing remained. The fantasy of a wedding. She transformed it into a stage for a performing center. Highlight. The attention on her was over. I refrained from boasting. I didn't tell people I told you so or send cryptic tweets. I simply continued to live. I started traveling after paying off my automobile. Actual trip. Unlike Jenna's well-manicured beach selfies, locations I'd always wanted to visit but could never justify since there was always someone else who needed the money more. At last, I began saving for a home. Not the family's home, but mine. The lease does not include someone else's name on it. Mine. I felt like I was creating something for myself for the first time in years. It came in a large white envelope with gold writing. No return address, I was aware beforehand. I carefully opened it. More than anything, I'm inquisitive. An invitation to celebrate Jenna Montgomery's 30 honest birthday, an evening of healing and fresh starts, was written on a folded card that was inside. It took place downtown in a leased hall. RSVP required, drinks, dress code. There was no personal letter, no dear my name. The mere presumption that I would arrive as if nothing had occurred. As if everything was okay now. Not with the same resentment as previously. I put down the invitation and chuckled. I was only amused. Jenna was still the same. Not at all. She recently discovered a new stage, a new type of performance. But me? I had changed. I failed to RSVP. I didn't text. I didn't send out the invitation at all. I put it in a frame. I hung it in my hallway on the wall. As a reminder, not out of animosity. Someone does not necessarily deserve your peace just because they are descended from you. I stayed at home on Jenna's birthday night. No commotion, no hesitation, no pacing slowly near the door, awaiting a change of heart. I prepared dinner instead. Something easy. Something specifically for me. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window as the city buzzed peacefully outside. Somewhere downtown, folks were clinking drinks and sharing filtered photographs of recovery. Not me, though. I didn't need a theme or a spotlight or an audience to feel whole. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bearing someone else's load. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, and most definitely, not out of some distorted idea of what a family should be. I remembered the dining table that evening. The time she yelled that I wasn't welcome. Everyone chuckled. They didn't know what they were starting. They believed they were interrupting me. In actuality, though, they set me free.